So good evening, my friends, and welcome to this session. So my topic is why should you publish? In fact, this is one of the toughest talks I've got because convincing residents to publish is not that simple. So let's begin with the first few questions. So I'm going to ask you a few questions again, and of course, if you answer them right, Dr. Batra and Dr. Sumitra give you the prizes. So who is Sergey Brin? I don't know if you know the answer to this. Which is who is the richest woman in the world, and she didn't even earn it. What does ataraxia mean? What is the Australian paradox? And of course, which is the second most translated religious book in the world? Now you will wonder that what is the relation of these questions with my talk? Well, as we go by, you'll understand that. So let's come to the wrong and the boring reasons for publication. Now, this is what you will hear in people who are in academic institutions that will help you to get a UPSC job. MCI has got a criteria for giving promotions depending on the number of papers. There's some more boring reasons to put on the Facebook and WhatsApp. I know of an editor of a very famous journal in the West who puts every article of his on Facebook to put outside the clinic in the reception. Is it to propagate the RJ index? I don't know why we keep propagating this RJ index. The more authentic index is the Google Scholar index. And of course, on a website. Now, these are the boring reasons. If this is your reason for publication, then don't publish. So what do you think is a good reason to publish? Well, I'll give you 3 good reasons to publish. And the 3 are altruism, footprints in the snow concept, and of course, when you are through with roti, kapda, and makan. So I'm going to discuss them all. So let's come to the first, and the one that's most relevant actually is altruism. Now, altruism basically is a noun which means to help others. So one very good aim of publishing is to publish a paper which helps your colleagues, your peers to make their practice better. So I'm going to give you 5 examples of the many examples where Indian publications have probably helped people. So I'll come to the first. Now, you know that when you see a patient of tuberculosis suspect in your clinics or in your practice, you all know that the textbook says you must do culture, you must do PCR, RNA, you must look for tuberculous pathology, and etc., etc. But we all know practically we never see these things. So many years back when I was doing my MD, one of my HODs, Dr. Sharma, used to tell us that the simplest way of knowing that it's tuberculosis is give a therapeutic trial. Now, well, that was his idea, but the other people published it. So paper from Orani Institute, Dr. Ramam and Dr. Ramesh. Another paper was published by Dr. Sehgal and myself, 2 papers in fact. And all these papers now find their place in Rooks, and now it is said that if you suspect tuberculosis and no test is diagnostic, then just give a 6-week trial. And if it fails, it is in TB. So this concept is called the therapeutic challenge concept, very useful in clinical practice. And even the reverse is true. We saw a case a couple of years back. The patient was given 2 courses of ATT because it looked like lupus vulgaris, but actually it was not, it was sarcoidosis. So you can use this principle in both for diagnosis and as a reverse concept to rule out tuberculosis. This is one example of an altruistic case series or study. Another example of something that will help all of us. Now we all know that we all see warts. Now this is 2010, this patient came to us with this really hideous wart that destroyed his nail plate. And at that time, what we did was actually very revolutionary. We told this patient that we'll treat you with a drug which might resolve the wart but might not get the nail back. But as you can see this photograph, the nail came back. So what we did was a technique which I know all of you use, bleomycin, dilution with saline, and we just did a prick method and the patient got a nail back. Now that was 2010. I know now there are series, but we published this way back at that time, and I can tell you this paper has been cited many times and has been used by a lot of people. So another example of altruistic publication. Third example. Now we all know that when you see a patient of acne scars, the question that the patient usually would ask you is, will all my acne scars respond to lasers? Now what is very paradoxically interesting is when the lasers came to this country in 2014, the Fraction laser, within 4 months of the Fraction laser coming to India, every speaker in every session was saying that it's an amazing tool to treat all scars. And I found that very amusing because it takes time for a scar to modulate. And so we decided to replicate this in our department. We did a study where we decided to assess improvement not globally, but scar-wise. So we tried to analyze which type of scar respond better? Because that's what's relevant to a patient. Somebody who has only maybe ice pick scars would not necessarily respond. So that time I know my PG was Dr. Mukesh Manji, who is now a successful dermatologist practicing at Noida and also in Jamia Hamdard. So he devised this self-devised tool of marking the different scars with a sketch pen. So he used red for ice pick, green for box scar, and blue for rolling. And we started doing the sittings of fractional laser and calling the patient every 3 months. This paper was published. We gave parameters to decide how a patient would respond to lasers, the different parameters. We gave a diagrammatic overview telling that the depth of the laser is more important. How deep does it go for a scar to respond? And of course, we published this paper in Derm Therapy and then opined that the box scar would respond, rolling would respond, the ice pick would not respond. This paper is published many, many years back, but it still stands true. There's no non-ablative laser or RF that can resolve ice pick scars. So this is another example of a series that can help people. Another example, of course, is one of my favorite examples. Should I laser a melasma case in Indian skin? Now, when we published this paper in the Journal of Dentistry and Aesthetic Surgery, people said, "Oh, Kabir is not one of the biggest journals in the world, and I don't think it's so great and all that stuff." Well, when I did my first laser book and my second laser book, I put a principle which I call the rule of thumb in that book, which is actually not my principle. It's a principle of Michael Goldman, who said that never use a laser on a dynamic pigmented disorder. Never. Melasma is dynamic, and if you use lasers on melasma, they will never respond. In fact, I can give you many more rationale for not using a laser. And of course, that same thing applies to picosecond. Picosecond lasers are useless for melasma. They were made for tattoos and not for melasma. Now, you might say this is a one-sided view of one person, but I can tell you clinically it's very useful. Of course, it's there in my book and also there in, guess where? Andrews. So I was seeing Andrews last week, and if you open Andrews, open the melasma chapter, you will find 2 of our case reports and commentaries cited in Andrews, saying the same story. So sometimes when you come up with a new concept, you may find people across the world accepting it without you even knowing about it. That's called altruistic series. And the last one, of course, is this classic thing. In 2013, we kept asking why terbinafine is failing in dermatophytosis. And we had the most fancy reason. We had global warming, we had poor hygiene, people should bathe more in this country. Then we had this concept of fungicides being used in agriculture, causing resistance to terbinafine, which was like laughable. Of course, compliance, of course, steroids. And then some smart company launched 500 mg terbinafine, unapproved by DCGI. It was actually approved for chromoblastomycosis, and people started using that, and still it failed. So no one really knew what's happening. Was it a clinical failure or was it actually resistance? All these things stopped when this paper was published, which is published from our department and from Delhi University's Premier Institute doing microbiological work, where they proved for the first time that the resistance in terbinafine was proven by mutations. And of course, another paper was published to tell the MIC correlation with mutation and the response. So remember that this is the first terbinafine mutation case series report from this country. And the motto is that when people say ataconazole fails because of resistance, I'm sorry to say that's a wrong statement. There is no mutation known to occur till now. So papers like this, redefine your thinking process and your prescription process. So that's the first logic, altruism. The second reason is footprints in the sand of time. Now you see, everybody wants that when you are not here and you're no longer there, people should remember you. It happens all over. We have statues being made by people to remember themselves. Now, what is the footprints here? Well, the footprint here actually is the PubMed. If you have a good paper on PubMed, it stays. So as long as there is word and there is the internet and the USA is funding NLM, the PubMed stays. So a good paper on the PubMed will actually stay many years after you're not here. Of course, most important, please publish in a PubMed index journal, please. Otherwise, it's actually total waste. Now come to the third reason, the one that I'm going to spend a bit of time on. And that is going beyond roti, kapda, or makan. Now, I'm sure all of us have got all these entities, and let's look at life beyond that. Now, there's a very famous article in Time magazine which said, "Does money get you happiness?" Okay, there's a whole series on that. I'm going to discuss this point, how much money do you need to get happy? This is based on this famous concept called the Easterlin paradox. This was propounded by an American economist called Richard Easterlin, who compared the lifestyle satisfaction of people in America in two time frames 20 years apart. And they found that money or more money did not make you more happy. In fact, they said that once you leave the poverty line behind and you've got a decent financial safety net, money does not matter. Of course, some of you may say then what matters? What matters is inner success, and for that, there's a famous Greek word called ataraxia. That is a tranquility of the soul, which might sound a bit abstract to you, but a simple way is try to focus on what you can influence. So the input is more important than the output. And of course, money, power, and popularity, which is what we all want, actually are not under our control. They are transient, and when they get lost, you get really hassled. Now, I know you may not believe this statement, but let's look at this. This is one of the most translated books in the world, Tao Te Ching, one translation, and this is a chapter 44. You must read this chapter when you get time. You can just search on the net if you want, and every single line of this is relevant. So, fame, money, success don't get you anywhere. And the last paragraph that I've given in your red box is just the essence of Tao Te Ching, that you should be happy with what you have and don't compare yourself with other people. Now, of course, I know some of you may still not agree, and for some of us, probably money is still important. So let's presume you're a rich man at the end of 20 years of practice. You go to the Bahamas to holiday, you've got 2 Audis and a Merc outside the house, and you've got 1 crore investment neat. And you know what this place is? This place is a famous place in Greece. It's called Mytoria, and you've got a house in Greece. Let us presume you have all that. But I can assure you, even with all that, you will not be known by anybody, because even today, I'm sure you do not know who is Sergey Brin. Sergey Brin is a person who's the 10th richest person in the world with an asset of 75.5 billion, which I can assure you, none of us are going to beat together also. And of course, there's another lady who is the richest woman in the world for other reasons. So whatever money you might make in your practice in next 20 years, you will not beat number 10, whom nobody knows even now. So if nobody knows Sergey Brin, well, nobody will know you also. So what can you do next? Well, supposing you think of this scenario. Now, you can't be Sergey Brin and you don't know who Sergey Brin is. So in other words, probably even if you earn that much money, no one will remember you. So, but many years after you're no more in this world, you know, some researcher sitting in south of France, Switzerland will get up one day and look for an article, and he'll find an article written by you titled "Antioxidant Stress and Its Role in JAK-STAT Pathway in Alopecia Areata," and he'll say, "Wow, there was this guy who did something really good," and I think that's worth it. And that is my last take home, that this is what actually matters in the end, what you publish and what stays beyond your life. So I'll summarize by saying 3 reasons again: leave a useful trail for others, leave a footprint on the PubMed for others to see, and of course, most important of all, money, power, and popularity don't last. A good paper would last for ages. So I just hope that I've managed to sensitize all of you and convince you for publication. Thank you very much. Jatin.